look, man, they're being really annoying, but this is words alone. It does not justify force until and unless they do something forceful to you.
We are the Armed Attorneys. Today we're talking about an unusual kind of circumstance that a lot of people find themselves in, and that is when people are impeding their ingress or egress or blocking their path. What are your self-defense rights in those scenarios? But before we begin, show your support for the Second Amendment by hitting that like button. And today's video is brought to you by our friends over at Sonoran Desert Institute. Check them out at sdi.edu/armed-attorneys. They have online gunsmithing, armor courses, and so much more. Take your hobby to the next level, maybe even turn it into a career with Sonoran Desert Institute. Now, I had a client call me with a very, very specific fact pattern, and it has caused a little bit of debate. And so I thought it would be fun to talk about. But essentially, the scenario he found himself in, he was out hiking. Then he had kind of a Monty Python, you shall not pass kind of situation.
Mm-hmm.
None shall pass. What? None shall pass.
And he wanted to know what his self-defense rights were under that scenario. And it raises a bunch of interesting issues.
It does. And, I'll say, just to lay out this episode, I think that it breaks down, in my mind at least, to three separate sort of tiers, right? Which is when someone is impeding your movement, it can be extreme, like essentially
Like confined.
Yeah, essentially you're confined. I mean, we're talking about, kidnapping, right? False imprisonment sort of thing. So are you confined in wherever you are because your movement's being impeded? Are you on your own property, right? Because that's like, we have trespass issues. I think that's another thing that we need to talk about. Or are you just our hiker, right? Are you out in public and we've got a situation where someone's being very childish and weird, but where do the legalities fall? So where do you want to start of those three? That's how it breaks out for me. What do you think?
Yeah, let's start out with the most obvious example, confinement. And what makes these cases so difficult, and for our security officer viewers, I mean, you kind of find yourself in these confinement scenarios a lot of the time. And it's because it undermines the immediacy, what in each of these three different scenarios. Immediacy becomes a huge issue in each one, and it becomes more obvious the more closely it looks like kidnapping, right?
Right.
And so we look at good self-defense principles. Is it reasonable, immediately necessary, and in response to another's use or attempted use of unlawful force or deadly force? Obviously, we have this spectrum. Now, for a kidnapping, we probably have each of those three things.
Right. So, I mean, if you find yourself, and right, lots of states, we are Texas lawyers, but there are people watching all over the country. There are lots of states in which, the sort of magic button to your self-defense rights is forcible felony, right? Which, I mean, kidnapping, aggravated kidnapping is often going to...
Unlawful restraint.
Right. Often going to qualify as a forcible felony. So if you are in a position, right, and we're talking about being the victim of that kidnapping, if you're in a position where you're like, man, this is a forcible felony, it is immediately necessary for me to use force, potentially deadly force, depending on the nature of how you're being confined. I mean, that's a very serious situation, and one in which, we get to, hit that Staples button of like, self-defense, right? So, I mean, that's the most extreme scenario. We're not normally going to find that, right?
But, good self-defense principles still apply, still has to be, and this goes to our immediacy element. Let's say you got a crazy girlfriend who won't let you leave the house, Obviously, each situation is going to be different. It's going to depend on the facts and circumstances that you particularly find yourself in. But
you still got to be reasonable.
Yeah, it still has to be reasonable. So let's talk about this on your own property scenario. Let's call it crazy person standing on your walkway up to your front door.
Right. So, yeah. So in this scenario, I'm thinking about like, okay, they're sort of like you're trying to get out to your car and they're on your property and they're blocking your way. Really, more than like talking about confinement issues, we're falling back on trespass issues, right? Which is what can you do to defend against this sort of trespass in your state? In Texas, you can't use deadly force. And most states, I would say all states probably, I don't know of a single state where you could use deadly force for a mere trespass. But bear in mind, force is probably reasonable,
Yeah.
right? If you're trying to leave, trying to get in your car, someone's blocking your way, they're on your property. But again, we're not falling back on principles of, well, this is the law of when someone is blocking my path or someone
Right.
is in my way. We're falling back on trespass principles, which is force that is reasonable, immediately necessary, and proportionate to end that sort of
Yeah,
trespass.
stop the trespass.
Right. Now, if they come at you, right, if they escalate it,
It's
we
trespass
call it,
plus.
we often call that trespass plus. So if they escalate, right, all bets are off on what we're saying, right?
Yeah.
At that point, fall back on your normal self-defense principles. But that's kind of our middle ground area. And again, it's not sort of this, this is not the law of someone's in my way.
Right. Yeah. And I would say, what makes a trespasser? It's when someone enters a location knowing entry is forbidden, or they remain in a place after being told to immediately depart. So if you find yourself in this scenario saying, hey, get off my property right now, all right, and they refuse, that's pretty good evidence that they've been told to leave and are refusing to leave.
Yes.
Now, what's difficult in these scenarios is juries love it, even in a stand your ground state. They love it if there's some reasonable, safe alternative to using force or deadly force. They want you to take it all the time. And obviously, we always want to use the least amount of force necessary to stop the threat. And so this one becomes really hairy. I don't know that we hit the button. Boom. I don't think it's easy.
That's my new thing now.
Yeah.
Meh.
Yeah.
Self-defense button.
Throw it up on screen. So this one becomes a little bit more gray. Always use the least amount of force necessary to stop the threat. If there's a reasonable, safe alternative, we're going to encourage you to take it. But trespass laws really is what's governing here. So the next scenario that we run into is just kind of out generally in public.
Yeah. This is your hiker.
Yeah, this is our hiker. These are people on the sidewalk blocking a sidewalk.
Well, I was going to say, I have a client right now who unfortunately had to engage in a self-defense shooting. The family of, on the other end, on the victim's end, is very, very upset, as you might imagine. No one likes to think my baby had it coming.
Sure.
Right? So they're very, very upset. And they are camping out on exactly they went to the county, figured out exactly where his property line ends, and are camping out on the public road right outside his property lines, screaming stuff at him when he walks to get his mail, screaming stuff at his neighbors about what a horrible person he is. I mean, we're talking about this kind of scenario. You're out in public, someone is doing something that's I don't know. It's more than annoying, right?
Yeah, and I would say the other scenario that I see come up all the time is protests.
Yes.
Somebody trying to enter a building or leave a building, and protesters will, block their path, or because they're just trying to be disruptive, or they'll box somebody in, they'll completely surround a person. So it shows up in a couple of different forms, but this one I would say is the most gray of the three scenarios we've talked about.
Yes, absolutely.
And
well, I was going to say, a big principle here, right? And this is one that, again, is true nationwide. I mean, leave a comment if this is not true in your state, but I don't know of a single state in which words alone are enough to get you any sort of force rights. So for the most part, someone's you could just walk around them or drive past them out of your driveway. This is look, man, they're being really annoying, but this is words alone. It does not justify force until and unless they do something forceful to you.
Yeah. So, and I know that there's a lot of scenarios where people they imagine something in their head and it's different necessarily than what we're talking about. We're talking about people with hands down at their sides,
yes,
simply moving and blocking the path. We're not talking about people with things in their hands, or people about to strike, or people lunging towards you. I mean, we were talking about merely blocking and saying nasty things. And Emily's right. That's the sticks and stones rule. The use of force or deadly force in response to words, generally not justified. And I'll tell you, juries are going to hate that. But what are your rights as far as let's say you're trying to enter? We've seen a lot of protests at colleges, for example. I want to walk into my classroom and people are blocking my path. I mean, these people, there's not a clear-cut answer.
There's not a clear-cut answer. We don't have good answers for you. I would say call law enforcement. I know that it's a hi, 911, I can't get to the place I want to go. I know that feels weird, but calling law enforcement to actually get them to physically move people is a great thing to do. If you know who the property owner is and they're easily accessible to come trespass the person, that's a great move too. I mean, just backing up and waiting for them to not be crazy anymore is also, or backing up and waiting for them to get crazy so that you can use force. I mean, really, I mean, I mean, honestly, I mean, they're going to either do one or the other, right?
Yeah, and I think this applies both to the hiking example and our blocking the path at like a college campus. But we go back and look at good self-defense principles, reasonable, immediately necessary. Juries like an element of innocence. They like it when people are beat bopping along and then are forced to respond to a threat. They don't like to see people heightening or engaging, and maybe things wouldn't be justified by use of force, but they start this Rube Goldberg machine that will eventually lead to a use of force or deadly force. They don't like that.
No.
And then they really like we said earlier, they like reasonable, safe alternatives. If there's some alternative to using force or deadly force, they want you to take it every single time.
And I know there are a lot of people out there who are like, well, the person who's blocking my path on the hiking trail, they're obviously doing something wrong and there's got to be some sort of recourse. And I get that. But I will tell you that there are so many things that people can do worse than that. There are so many things people can do to you that do not quite rise to the level of criminal actions. And like cue Game of Thrones, if you're looking for justice, you won't find it here because there are just conditional threats is a great example of that, right?
Yeah.
Richard, if I see you on Christmas, I will shoot you in the face.
Conditional threat.
Conditional threat. You cannot do anything about that.
Yeah,
That
there's
is
not a right
crime.
for every wrong.
Right, exactly. There is not a right for every wrong. Lots of people are mad at us right now, but that's what we got.
But I'm interested. You can see, it goes from pretty clear cut to gray to extremely gray. So it's not a straightforward answer, but we hope you enjoyed this discussion. If you did, consider subscribing, hit that like button, and help us fight the anti-2A algorithm by sharing this video.
And if you have other solutions for this kind of situation, leave a comment. Tell us. We would love to have good practical things to advise our clients. Again, we're out of the legal realm into the practical, and you guys are really smart about that. So let us know. Until next time, we're the Armed Attorneys.
Yeah, you shall not pass.
Rain Man with my stick. Mariachis.